Dorothy Lawrence, being arrested after posing as a male soldier to ride on the front lines during World War I in 1915. A mother and son laugh happily as they finally board a ship fleeing Shanghai in 1949. Young Russian peasant women in front of traditional wooden house in a rural area near the small town of Kirilov in 1909. A fisherman out on work for night fishing in Hawaii in 1948. A woman feeding an African girl like an animal in the last human zoo in Brussels in 1958. Italian beauty Giovanna Mazzoni riding on a motor scooter with her date in Rome in 1952. An army of schoolgirls marching through Tokyo, their faces an anonymous sea of gas masks in 1936. Membership of the German League of Girls was compulsory from age 10 in 1937. President John F. Kennedy lies in state at the Capitol Rotunda in 1963. British factory workers assembling Sten submachine guns in Royal Small Arms Factory in 1942. A Waffen-SS officer surrenders to a U.S. Army sergeant near Tangerman, Germany in 1945. Mrs. Eileen Frame equips her children with surgical masks to protect themselves from London smog, as it had killed thousands of people in 1953. A French woman pours cider for a British artilleryman in 1944. 3 Jewish children on their way to Palestine after being liberated from the Buchenwald concentration camp in 1945. Chinese-American war worker in Los Angeles wore a handwritten sign in his back to avoid being mistaken for Japanese in 1942. A man on a penny-farthing bicycle alongside Walter Nielsen aboard the Nielsen monowheel in 1935. Nurses and patients watched the dogfights between the Royal Air Force and the German Air Force in 1940. Miss South Africa while visiting the Rhodesian Bush War troops during the 1970s. Louis Armstrong with neighborhood kids on the steps of his house in 1970. Physical education lesson for pupils at a grammar school in Basel, Switzerland in 1897. In its beginnings, physical education at school was envisaged as preparation for military service. Ballerinas peeking into the men's locker room in 1948. Muhammad Ali boxing against a Russian heavyweight during his visit to Moscow in 1978. The main plaza in San Antonio, Texas, photographed in 1872, 36 years after the fall of the Alamo. Dutch colonial soldiers interrogate an Indonesian boy part of a guerrilla troop during the Indonesian War of Independence in 1945. Maharaja Duleep Singh, the last Sikh ruler of the Punjab, in 1854. Hitler photographed by Heinrich Hoffmann in 1925, practicing speaking while recording play in the background. He later had these photos banned. 2 women working as ice deliverers carry a large block of ice from the back of a wagon in 1918. Nancy Debenham giving a group of children a ride on her motorcycle in 1923. George Spinney sits with his pet bulldog named Joan Gold at the Middlesex Hospital Open Championship Dog Show at the Crystal Palace in London in 1926. 18-year-old mother from Oklahoma, now a California migrant, in 1937. Susan Peters riding her Monarch bicycle along the Pacific Palisades at Santa Monica in 1942. 3-year-old Robert Quigley smoking a cigar in 1928. Adelaide Springett, who was so ashamed at the state of her boots that she took them off, stand for a photograph in London in 1901. 2 of the helpers in the Tifton Cotton Mill, Tifton, and Georgia, in 1909. Rosa Maria Gozdziewska was the youngest Polish nurse to serve in the field hospital of the Koszta Company during the Warsaw Uprising in 1944. Little girl named Harlem in her homemade toy car in 1947. Harrison Ewing photograph collection, Helen Mary, Washington, D.C., 1915. Friend helps his amputee friend, injured in war in Naples, in 1944. Children of migratory pea pickers, in Brawley Camp, in 1939. Preston Reeves, just 18 months old boy, receiving a JetFlow drive station wagon during Christmas, in 1952. Migratory children living in the Ramblers Park, they have lived on the road for 3 years, in 1939. Jean Eliza Tierney, she is wearing a hat with a feather, a mink stole, and leather gloves, in 1942. Mary Dixon Palmer, daughter of the Attorney General, in 1920. Silverstream School, primer for children and pet lamb, in 1965. Rocky the Penguin, who never misses a chance to show off in front of the visitors of the Cotswold Wildlife Park, in 1980. Grand Duchesses Olga and Tatiana Nikolaevna Romanov, of Russia in their regiment uniforms, in 1911. Ferris, a 7-year-old newsie who did not know enough to make change for investigator, in 1914. Ava Gardner, wearing a costume for the movie, On My Forbidden Past, in 1951. Laurie Piper, getting a ticket for skateboarding in Hermosa Beach, in 1970s. Rosie, a 7-year-old regular oyster shucker, in 1913. Female stunt pilot, member of Death Valley Flyers, in 1944. A female glass worker carrying a tube of rolled glass, at Pilkington Glass Limited, in 1918. Sally Wadsworth, an employee of Lockheed Martin, working on the fuselage of a P-38 Lightning in California, in 1944. Field Marshal, Friedrich Wilhelm Ernst Paulus, commander of the 6th Army during the Battle of Stalingrad, in 1931. Andrew Hamilton Russell, drives his new invention, a car with wings and a propeller through Times Square, New York, in 1924. Homecoming, a British soldier with his 8-month-old daughter, as he arrives at the docks from overseas, in 1945. Stella Young, a donut girl for the Salvation Army, during World War I, in 1918. Tommy Hawkins, a 5-year-old boy, sells papers, in 1909. Drive-in car hops in shorts, and cowboy boots at the Log Lodge Tavern, near Love Field Airport in Dallas, in 1940. A little girl holds a penguin's flipper, as they walk together around the London Zoo, in 1937. Some cowgirls riding hobby horses, in 1950s. Young Soviet boys with captured German weapons, following the Battle of Stalingrad, in 1943. Little girl and her pet at a pet show, in 1936. Joan Trumpauer Mulholland, American civil rights activist and a freedom rider, in 1961. Some pretty woman during Skate to Work campaign, in 1940s.